common Catan placement advice is this: when in doubt, place it out. But often there's not enough time to do this. That's why I'll give you the 3 methods I use to predict open spots within 60 seconds. And they are the exact methods I used to finish top 50 of the world last season. Let's get started. Method number 1, the sandile approach. The first step is to look at the sandile, and specifically where it's located. If the sandile is in the outer ring, there's tons of space on the board, and it makes it so the middle of the board is unlikely to be completely locked out. And don't get me wrong, you still want to know the best positions. On this board they are the 6-5-9, the 8-5-10 at the bottom, 6-9-4, the 8-5-10 at the top, the 8-4-3 at the top, 9-10-11 and the 8-4-3 at the bottom. So that would leave the 6-3-11s and the 6-11-12. And when you found your spot, work backwards. So, okay, the 6-3-11. What top tier spot does it work best with? On this board, the first pick is not the 6-5-9, but the 6-9-4 instead. Because the ore and wheat of the 6-9-4 combined with the sheep from the 6-3-11 makes it so the strategy becomes a very strong ore wheat sheep setup. The strongest strategy in the game. If the sandile is in the second ring instead, you have to look for a coastal spot. Because the sandile limits the amount of free hex spots on the board. A strong coastal spot that doesn't get blocked out by a good free hex spot is the best you can get here, in most of the games. Here, as first position, you have to look at coastal spots, because it's unlikely a free hex spot will get back to you. The best coastal spots are the 5-10, the 8-10, the 8-4, the 9-10, the 8-10, the 8-3 and the 6-3. But some of these great spots will be blocked out by better free hex spots selected by another player. The 6-9-3 will block out the 6-3 and the 5-9-10 will block out the 9-10 for example. Again, when you found your spot, work backwards. What top tier spot works the best with the 2 hex coastal spot you have in your mind? If you place on the 6-9-3 here, you already have strong wheat and sheep. So you only need a strong ore to play a strong ore wheat sheep strategy. And you can get it on the 8-10 or the 8-3, whichever is left open. Alternatively, you could play the 5-10. But I don't like the 5 resource setup as much in this situation. When the sandile is in the center of the board, the spots around the sandile and the 4-3-11 often open up. Also keep an eye on spots around the coast. So you can play the 8-5-10 at the bottom with ore wheat and sheep, and you could combine it with the 9-11 around the desert, and you could play a decent ore wheat sheep strategy. You could also go with the 5-9-10 and combine it with the 6-5 near the desert or the 4-3-11. And there's many coastal options as well. For example, 5-9-10 with the 8-4. But you could also play the 8-5-10 with these combinations. It's all very good strategies. I personally would go 8-5-10 on this board. But looking at the sandile isn't the only tip I have for you. Here's a few tips on recognizing your opponent's moves before they happen. Number 1. Always expect the highest production. The numbers are valued based on how likely it is that dice will roll them. The 8 is much more likely to be rolled than an 11, which is why it's better to place it on the 8-5-10 than on the 4-3-11. Number 2, look at the resource value. On this board, the ore is extremely valuable, because with only a 5, a 3 and an 11 there's not a lot of, which means players are more likely to give you good deals to trade this resource with you. Number 3, ore and wheat are the best. Number 4 is that most beginner and intermediate players generally look for a 5 resource setup. Tip number 5 is that top tier players can play anything that has enough production. For example, as 4th position, if I would get the 5-9-10 and the 8-10-11 at the top, I could definitely play this, even though it's only wheat, sheep and brick. I could make that work by trading with my opponents, using the brick port and utilizing the 3-for-1 port as well. And the last tip before I continue with method number 2 is board locking is possible on any board type. Board locking happens when all players take a spot further from the coast, which makes it so there's no free hex spots left on the board, which forces first and second position to build on the 2 hex spot instead. So you want to keep that in mind when doing your settlement placements. For example, on this board, these 6 spots have been taken, which makes it so there's no free hex spots left. And now we take a look at method number 2, common pairs. The second method is to look at what resource combinations are plentiful on the board. I'm referring to the resources that are located next to each other in a couple of good spots. This board has a ton of high producing spots that combine wood and sheep, like the 6-9-4, the 6-5-9 and the 8-5-10 at the bottom. Not every player would want these spots for the reasons that if every player has wood and sheep, it's difficult to trade these resources away and get a good card in return. That's why selecting the ore, wheat and brick spots in this situation leads to a better balance in the cards you produce throughout the game. Let's say I'm first position and I doubt between the 8-4-3 and the 8-5-10 at the top. And the reason I wouldn't pick the 8-10-3 here is because of this scenario. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and you're forced to the coast. That's not what you want at all. First, we know from the sandile there's a ton of space available. We can likely get a free hex spot with an 8th settlement. To get a good setup with the 8-5-10, I would want to get at least some wheat production to go with all that ore. But in terms of free hex spots, that's highly unlikely, because the other good wheat spots are either not so good or next to other valuable resources in this game. But this spot is located next to the wood board, which is super valuable on this board with so much wood. If you would select the less producing or wheat 843 here, it's super likely you can get a sheep plus something else spot with your ace settlement. Let's just place it out to see. First takes 843 or wheat, second takes 8510 or brick. Third could do a couple of things here, but generally speaking, the two remaining players, third and fourth, take the following spots. The 9, 10, 11, setting yourself up for a road builder setup. The 843 is very strong in combination with the wood board, either 659 or 6511, and 6311 with or wheat and sheep. There's an argument someone takes the 8510 instead of the 6311 if they want to focus on the strong wood board. Now let's take a look at the remaining spots. They are the 694 and either the 6311 or the 8510. I think you'd be very pleased with taking the 843 over the higher producing 8510 or 659 in this position, because I think all of these options work great with your setup. This method actually works more often than you would expect. To be able to predict what spots your opponents might place on, you have to know what strategies are available. Like I said before, many beginner players go with a 5 resource setup. If someone has placed on an 8410 or wheat wood, be wary of any brick sheep spots that's open, because a lot of beginners and even some advanced players would take it over other positions available. Second, if a player has started on an or wheat spot, they can create the following setup. They can build on a sheep wood brick spot to make it a 5 resource setup. They can build on more sheep with perhaps a bit more or and wheat to make a full or wheat sheep setup, or they could build on sheep with either some wood or brick to create a hybrid or wheat sheep setup. Or instead of building on sheep, they could build on a wood brick spot to play a city plus road setup. And third, spots with 7 production pips or more with a powerful board, which could be a 3-for-1 board or a 2-for-1 board that fits well with the player's resources, are often taken over higher producing spots. Keep this in mind when selecting your settlements and porting your roads, because you don't want to be in the situation that you put all your attention on getting a certain port and that someone just picks it. In general, I believe you can't win the game with placements, but you can definitely lose it. Now let's take a look at method number 3, corner opportunities. And soccer isn't the only game that has corners. You see, I'm referring to the corners of the board. The corners on this board are the 8 wheat, the 5 sheep, the 6 sheep, the 8 ore, the 9 ore and the 11 wood. Why is it relevant? Well, it's because these corners only give room to a maximum of 1 free hex spot. For example, if a player takes the 8510, it blocks out the 853. The only way to build on the 8 ore is by giving the 8-3 a go. Or if you really dislike winning, you could place on the 8 ore with the 3-for-1 board instead. When I see these corner spots, I know that either the 8-3 or the 8-10 will be left open. Or if another player takes one of these spots, it makes it so another free hex spot is not selected. In a couple of situations, you can select a spot that works great with both 2 hex spots. For example, if I select the 6-5-10 at the bottom, I'm happy with either the 8-10 wheat brick or the 8-4 wheat wood if the 8-10-11 is selected. But to be able to predict your opponents with exact precision, you need to know the most popular strategies and how to play them.